It was a request made on the part of a particular local Jewish business. In this case, I think only because the story is so public and so well publicized, Westside Judaica sent out this urgent email to all the rabbis of all the communities, begging everyone to put in their synagogue newsletters effectively a plea to all of the congregants that they should help support the store. Why? Because this year, once again, the landlord raised the rent, and they find it difficult or impossible to maintain the store the way it's currently set up, the way it's currently operating, and so they want people to go out of their way to buy more items at Westside Judaica, which sounds like a great communist idea. The question is really, does this actually serve the better interests of the community? So, do we have such an obligation? So we're being implored to patronize this particular store, and yes, obviously, you can always find a halachic source that seems to indicate or to imply one course of action or another under particular circumstances. And so here's the halachic source. Why don't we just analyze this, investigate, try to come to some kind of a conclusion? So, in my research, I did not find any Torah Shebe'al Peh punctuated. I have to apologize. At least Torah Shebichtav is. But Andrea, thanks for volunteering.
No.
Go ahead and read the.
But we're being recorded.
Huh? Yeah, I'll be saying things that maybe should or shouldn't be recorded later. But this is a pasuk from the Torah. I don't think anyone has.
וכי תמכרו ממכר לעמיתך או קנו מיד עמיתך אל תונו איש את אחיו.
Right. So what is it? וכי תמכרו ממכר לעמיתך. Literally, should you sell something to your peer, your colleague? Amit is a very interesting word in Hebrew. I have to discuss this a little bit. But amitecha generally means your peer or your equal or someone of identical or very similar status to you. And here, in the context of a transaction, it implies there's no strong or weak party. There's no one here is taking advantage of anyone else. This is a purely business-oriented deal. If I buy from you or I sell to her or to him, it doesn't necessarily imply. If I'm borrowing money from someone because I'm destitute and I have nowhere else to go, yes, perhaps I have the underhand, the lower hand, and therefore I need to. The Torah, invokes rules and regulations and laws as to how you should conduct yourself, how you shouldn't. Don't torment someone who owes you money. Don't force. Don't take as collateral for the loan the only article of clothing that he or she has. Don't torment widows, orphans, converts, etc. So, Amit implies the relationship of peers, a relationship of equals, where there isn't really anybody who has the upper or lower hand. So, v'chitimkiru mimkar la'amitecha, right? The famous pasuk that's invoked. So, if you're selling something, you're selling anything. Mimkar is literally anything that would be sold to one of your peers. Oh, kano miyad amitecha. By the way, this is a very interesting grammatical construct in the Hebrew, where the word kano doesn't really mean. It doesn't translate very cleanly. You could say it's a way of saying if you are selling or purchasing something, purchasing or selling. Selling or purchasing, mimkar and then kano. It's just we don't very commonly use this particular form of the verb, this particular conjugation. But o kano miyad amitecha, or should you be purchasing something from the hand of your peer, al tonu ishet achiu. Don't lehonot, probably to take advantage of, would be a nice way of putting this. So the Torah, in very broad strokes, at first glance, is commanding us to behave equitably when it comes to transactions. I'm buying something or I'm selling something. I should not take advantage of the other. I might have information that you don't. Maybe I'm buying a product that has an exceptional value to it that you yourself don't even know about. And if you were to know this, you wouldn't sell it. Maybe the king all of a sudden decided he's collecting coins of a certain kind, and I can buy something dirt cheap, and you're going to regret this later. Maybe there's a shortage that you're not aware of. Maybe there's a defect in the product. Maybe there's a defect in the purchaser or the seller. there's a lot of behaviors that could theoretically fall into this category of taking advantage of someone or manipulating information that you have that they don't. And here the Torah is telling you not to do this. Not to do this, not to take advantage of such a situation. Now, we're going to get our feet wet in the Midrash. We had a couple of requests for Talmud. I don't know that Talmud is as, let's say, universally enjoyable as the Midrash is. Talmud tends to be, there are obviously sugyot on all kinds of areas and aspects of life. But when it comes to the Midrash, I think, focusing on things that are either current or related to the parasha, just to give you a better understanding of something that we're a little bit more involved, have our feet a little bit more wet, let's say, in the parasha. So, the concept of midrash, just to give us a little bit of an introduction, a little bit of a background. A midrash is never, of all things that it is, it's never a translation or a simple explanation of the pasuk. This already, get out of your head. The midrash is not Rashi, and for that matter, Rashi overwhelmingly quotes the midrash. It's very interesting. He doesn't come to translate word for word or to give you the simplest explanation. He uses midrashim to give you a certain degree of understanding of the pasuk. Assuming you're fluent in Hebrew, right? And I want to believe that we all are. Assuming that you're fluent in Hebrew, there is almost never a compelling reading of the midrash that would convince someone who understands the Hebrew on his or her own. Okay? In other words, this isn't a translation where I say, look, I'm in court, I have to take make a sworn statement over a particular contract in a particular language. Can you swear that your competence and your knowledge of this language and this context, that your translation is accurate, it's loyal to the original? And I can say yes, and I can say no. If you were to give me a midrash on a particular pasuk, no normal Hebrew speaker would necessarily arrive at this conclusion, or for that matter, even be convinced that this is the only or the most compelling understanding of the pasuk. That's not the purpose of the midrash. That's the purpose of what we call pshat. So let's take a little bit of a detour. This is not the Zohar. This is not Kabbalah. This is right out of the Talmud itself. It's alluded to in Masechet Chagigah, the famous second chapter that we learned a few years ago. It's mentioned by the Rambam, by Maimonides, in Moreh Nevuchim, the Guide to the Perplexed, where he mentions this concept of what we refer to amongst us as the pardes, right? The pardes, literally pardes means an orchard in Hebrew, and where it appears in the Gemara, Masechet Chagigah, it appears in the context of the secrets of the Torah, the deeper levels, the innermost chambers of the Torah and of Torah understanding. And the traditional interpretation of this concept is that the word pardes is not just a reference to an orchard, which the Zohar uses often enough to refer to where the fruits of the Torah are picked, so to speak, the inner levels of understanding, of enlightenment. It often refers to the Torah as a field of etrogim, literally tapuchim, but tapuach in Hebrew means etrog. It's fragrant, it's pleasant. This is where the Talmidei Chachamim, are said to hang out, so to speak, in the non-physical yeshiva of understanding prophecy and divinity, etc. So, our traditional understanding is not just that pardes means an orchard literally, but that it's also an acronym. And the acronym, as explained by the Rambam, Moreh Nevuchim, very simple: Peshat, Remez, Darash, and Sod. These are 4 levels of understanding. Let's say 4 layers of understanding of the scripture specifically. Pshat, Remez, Darash, and Sod, where Pshat is the simple understanding of a pasuk. Okay? Maybe we can correct that and we can amend it a little bit. It'll be the simplest understanding of the pasuk the way that it's written, without any comparisons or contrast, without adding or detracting from it. Here's the pasuk the way it's written. Here's the pshat. The easiest way to find a pshat on a pasuk, look up Onkelos. It's a very, if you understand the Aramaic, or if you can find a competent translation of it, Onkelos turns the world inside out to give you the simplest, not the literal understanding of the pasuk, but the simplest, most straightforward meaning of it. So if it says, for example, that Hashem saw or Hashem knew or acted on something or realized something. So he would say something like it became revealed before Hashem, such and such, that Hashem sees literally the physical eyes. That's not pshat, that's avodah zarah. That's idolatry. What we're talking about is the ability to understand the pasuk in the most sensible, reasonable way, just the way that it's written. Okay? Remez would be, what might the pasuk be alluding to? It could have been written in a number of ways. Sometimes it's a peculiar, a kind of bizarre choice of words, or a combination of words, or an expression. A funny example of this would be that by Paro, we have a couple of different references to his pulmonary condition. At one point, it's Hashem ichbidat libo, his heart became heavy. At one point, it's he hardens his own heart. So Hashem tells you that he's hardening his heart. Sometimes Paro hardens his own heart. Sometimes his heart is heavy. Kaved lev Paro, we're told at another point. And although we usually refer to someone as having a hard heart, it doesn't appear that way in the context of Paro. So never are we told that his heart is hard, it's only that we're told that it's heavy. Might be alluding to something, might be referring to something. Where else do you find such a concept? The only other place in the Torah where you find that Hashem manipulated someone's mood or someone's condition, spiritual, psychological, maybe both, is by Sihon Melech HaEmori. We're told Ki yaksha Hashem et rucho. And there, instead of saying Hashem hardened his heart, we're told that Hashem hardened his spirit. So you'll sometimes find a curious use of words, a curious phrase, a curious idea. Not always so simple, but often enough you'll say it could have been said otherwise. What might this be alluding to or hinting to, referring to? Darash, the third layer in depth, from most superficial to the most profound, would be an understanding that's built upon other understandings. In other words, this is your ability to take a pasuk and to say, this word over here appears in this particular context. It appears elsewhere in another context. So I can learn something from this place to that one. I can learn something from that one to this one. I can compare and contrast. I can draw conclusions. Maybe this peculiar, bizarre choice of words or choice of phraseology is actually meant to hint, to allude to a reality or an understanding that appears somewhere else. As if to say, if you want to understand the whole picture over here, you're going to have to do some homework and compare and contrast other situations elsewhere. So we have a situation where Avraham laughs and he receives prophecy, and Sarah laughs and she gets punished, but they're both laughing. So laughing is a good thing or a bad thing? And then we have Avimelech, the king of the Plishtim, who sees Yitzchak metzachek et Rivka ishto. So apparently in that context it was a good thing, or at least between a husband and wife it was applicable, appropriate. Sometimes we have laughter associated with murderers and debaucherous behavior. So you can compare these concepts. You can actually understand, if you want to refine your appreciation of the Torah's definition of a particular concept or a subject, look up where it appears, especially the first place it appears, and then see where else it appears subsequently and how it comes up. So you'll find famous midrashim, like every time the word Vayhi appears, something's wrong. I didn't make it up. It's a famous midrash. Every time Vayhi bimei Achashverosh, it always introduces some kind of a calamity, some kind of a disaster, some kind of a problem. And even where it sounds innocuous enough, we come to the conclusion it has to be bad. There's got to be something wrong. There must be something you didn't know. And you find the midrash will point this out almost every single time it comes up. So there's some classic midrashim where we say, this particular word or that particular phrase, it means something here, but it also means something there. Maybe I would be tempted to draw some kind of a conclusion from the one place that I'm looking at now. The reality is that understanding has to be moderated, has to be influenced by our understanding elsewhere, where I might think to be strict, but really you can use it to be lenient. I might think it's good, maybe it's not so good, maybe it's mixed, etc. So I mentioned this by way of background. Clearly, the Midrash is a deeper level of understanding, a point that's very often lost on people who study Midrash, and for that matter, the Talmud, is that we do call it Beit Midrash, right? Is that an understanding, right, with the indefinite article. So an understanding is not necessarily the understanding with the definite article. The fact that you can learn something in a particular way, or you can point something out and teach something from it, doesn't necessarily mean this is the only way to learn. Which is why very often midrashim are viewed in the modern yeshiva world, they're kind of optional. Nobody really takes the midrashim very seriously. They don't study them. Even though it's the same chachamim that taught the Gemara, from whom we learn halacha, comes to midrash, it's all of a sudden, that's cute. That's like the little midrash says, a little like the books they print for the kids and pictures. Very often you'll find the midrashim also speak in hyperbole. So you'll find very, what sounds like very exaggerated references to the size of things, or to the strength of something, or to the importance of something, and that's not for nothing. We'll talk about that. Chazal could have said things in more than one way, and clearly they chose the words very carefully, but we'll get into a few examples of this. So we have a midrash.
Just a question.
Go, please.
The midrash comes from tradition, or it's like how? At some point, did they compile midrashim?
Very good question. So, some of the midrashim are a little bit more ancient than others.
Mm-hmm.
That much is clear. Of the oldest midrashim that we have in our possession today, and we've lost the overwhelming majority of them. So, of the oldest midrashim that we have, Midrash Rabbah is probably the oldest and, let's say, most authentic in its antiquity. Even that, apparently Chazal viewed the 5 volumes of Midrash Rabbah as 5 different works. So Bereshit Rabbah specifically is a very ancient midrash. It appears all over the Talmud, meaning they're cross-referenced in different works. Midrash Tanhuma is also probably as old, except the entire thing is considered to be one work. Rabbi Tanhuma was a very famous Tana, apparently much more proficient in Agadah, or at least in Midrash, and learning Pesukim than in, let's say, Halacha, dried Halacha. Even then, you had people who specialized in different things. So Midrash Tanhuma was available in a somewhat corrupt version for many years, and as recently as the discovery of the Cairo Geniza in the 50s or 60s, not Martin Buber. There was a Rav Buber. I forget his first name. Martin Buber's name comes up. No, Martin Buber comes up from Jewish literature. I don't know if he was the one who himself went over the Midrash. Anyway, Rashi, for example, makes a lot of references to Midrash Tanhuma, and what he says doesn't correspond exactly to what we have. Or he mentions Midrashim that don't appear in the Midrash Tanhuma that we have. So it turns out that there actually was a much older version of what we have, and apparently a lot of midrashim that appear, or that didn't appear at all, or that appeared a little bit differently, seem to correspond much better to the Buber edition of the Midrash Tanhuma. So, Torat Kohanim is referred to in the Gemara. It's also that's what we're going to go into in a second. Most of Torat Kohanim is dry halacha. So some of the midrashim talk about, we have what's called Midrashei Agadah, where they talk about Pesukim, they talk about, let's say, stories from the Tanakh, or particular miraculous occurrences, or hashgacha, malachim. In other words, they speak more about the non-physical aspects of life and what exactly happened kind of behind the scenes in the stories in the Tanakh. Some of the midrashim are just midrashei halacha. So Torat Kohanim happens to be written exclusively on Parashat Vayikra. And because Chumash Vayikra is referred to as Torat Kohanim, because most of the mitzvot are applied to Kohanim Rebbeim, it happens to be that we have, in the case of Parashat Behar, some monetary laws. A lot of it talks about Korbanot, Turumot, Ma'asrot, things that were required to give the Kohanim, but there are lots of other midrashim. Nidarim appears in the end. So those are the more ancient ones. There are a number of them that we lost completely, and some of them are referred to here and there in a compilation of midrashim that we call Yalkut Shimoni. You may have heard of it or seen it. Yalkut Shimoni is basically, it takes from the Midrash Rabbah, Midrash Tanhuma, a few other places. Midrash Mishlei is another ancient one. Midrash Tehillim, Midrash Mishlei. Midrashim on Yov go back quite a bit. So Yalkut Shimoni collects from all the Midrashim and from the Gemara. We don't know exactly to whom we ascribe this particular. Apparently, someone by the name of Shimon. If we had to take a wild guess, and he has in the Yalkut Midrashim that we can't find anywhere else. So apparently, at least in his time, if we're talking about maybe the 9th or 10th century, he had access to Sfarim that weren't transcribed before they were lost. So he refers to a few things like this by Matan Torah, by the Shivim Zekinim, and Chazal refer to Midrashim that we just don't have. In other words, we know they had other books, and that's what it is. We just can't find them. So that pretty much sums up the Midrashim that we have. Sifra and Sifrei also we have for the most part in Vayikra. They're generally Midrashei Halacha. And then we have a lot of it's quoted in the Talmud. So some of what we don't have as an independent standalone work is at least referenced in the Talmud itself. So we may not have the entire book, but we know that there is a midrash as a midrash that's discussed in a particular passage of Gemara, and so we have no reason not to we accept it like we would accept anything else. But it is the important feature of the Midrashim is that the same Tanaim and the same Amoraim that appear in the Talmud appear in the Midrashim. This isn't the minor league. This isn't they're no less meaningful or significant. In fact, there's a famous saying by Rav Kook who said that he used to teach us Talmidei Midrash same way he teaches Gemara. You really have to debate, you have to negotiate with it, you have to fight and try to understand it, you have to compare and contrast opinions. And if he says this here, but he said that there, then you have to somehow reconcile them. Very few institutions today use the same, let's say, intellectual or academic rigor when they analyze it. Again, it's like cute stories. You learn about the parasha when you were little. That's how they look at it. Well, Chazal use the term midrash much more generally than we do. So lidrosh, where does it appear? By Rivka. She was pregnant, she had twins, she was suffering. And so what do you do when you're pregnant, you have twins and you suffer? You learn Torah, of course. Why would you? I have ultrasound. So she went to Shem Ve'ever, to the yeshiva, and she asked them, why is it that I'm suffering? I know pregnancy is difficult, we've been over this, Hawa, etc., but still, this really hurts, this is uncomfortable. And she'd never been pregnant before, which is also, so she's like, I know this isn't how it's supposed to be. And so, lidrosh means to seek, Dorosh Darash Moshe, by Parshat Tzav, right in the Parshat Tzav. So, Shemini. Sorry. Hey, Shemach. So lidrosh in Hebrew literally means to seek, to look for something, to actively, like proactively look for something, make efforts to look for something. And so we use it kind of figuratively to mean to look for something abstract, like a deeper understanding or some kind of deeper meaning of something. So we use when Chazal said lidrosh, they meant to take a pasuk and to explain it, or to find the meaning in it, or to find one way of understanding it. When we say, when we today refer to a midrash, we refer to something that appears in a book that was that collected and compiled as such, basically.
So if a Tana take a verse and try to give an explanation of the verse, is considered would be combined in a midrash, and if he just give a teaching.
Right. It might be a midrash that appears in the Gemara, but it would still be a midrash. Yeah. Look at it that way. So teaching or extrapolating on something, right? Achid Darashah Ben Zoma, we say in the Haggadah. So he learned the pasuk in such a way that it made it. Not only do we have to learn about Yetziat Mitzrayim during the day, but also at night, and specifically the night of Pesach is like the night of all nights. And even though the pasuk seems to imply during the day, Leman Tizkor Yom Tzedachad Mitzrayim Kol Yemei Chayecha, so you should remember the day of leaving Egypt every day of your life. He said Yemei Chayecha Hayamim, Kol Yemei Chayecha Afarilot. So every day of your life implies not just the days of my life, but all of the days of my life, like even the night, which is part of the day. Lots and lots of depth to the concept. And usually we just glance over these things and we keep on going. But we're going to have a good time with this one. Okay, if anybody feels comfortable reading without the vocalization, feel free. If not, then David, thank you.
Okay.
Torah Tkunim, Parashat Behar.
Parashat Behar.
This is Perek Kafei Pasuk Yudal. The Midrash isn't organized by number; just it refers to psukim in order. So.
תניא, מניין כשאתה מוכר, לא תהיה מוכר אלא לעמיתך.
Right, so the Midrash, it teaches you like this. Tanya, by the way, refers to a Braita. So even this Midrash refers to an older source. From where do we learn that if you're selling, you should only be selling to one of your peers, meaning to a fellow Jew.
תלמוד לומר, וכי תמכרו ממכר לעמיתך.
Because it says, because there's a pasuk that says, "Ki timkuru ממכר לעמיתך."
מניין כשאתה קונה, לא תקונה אלא מיד עמיתך. תלמוד לומר, או קנה מיד עמיתך.
או קנו.
או קנו
מיד עמיתך. So, and where do we learn that if you're going to be buying something, you should only be purchasing it from one of your fellow Jews? The answer is, O kano miyad amitecha. And Abigail, she's not impressed. She heard, okay, it sounds cute, but is that what the pasuk said? Go back and read it. This is, I have to tell you, classic. Because they're grown people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, people who've been learning Torah their entire lives. They say, oh, it's easy, the Midrash says this. But the pasuk doesn't. The Midrash is trying to teach you something, and the pasuk doesn't say that. In fact, if you go back and read the pasuk in context, you have to see the bigger context, which I didn't, would have filled up the whole page, but it's discussed in this Parashat Behar. It talks about the Shemitah, it talks about the Yovel, it talks about purchasing land. Right? So, I'm just reading the pasuk simply. And should you, is how I would translate this, and should you purchase any purchasable item from one of your colleagues, one of your peers, or should you, should you sell anything sellable to any of your peers, or purchase anything purchasable from one of your peers, you should not take advantage of or usurp one another. And so Re'eh Levy is going to tell me like this, and I know because I remember him already from YU, and he used to give me headache-full questions. So wait a second. The pasuk is saying, should I purchase something, or should I sell something, or should I purchase something? Just don't do this. Just don't take advantage of people. Ariel, buy or sell whatever you want. Just don't take advantage of anybody. That's all I asked you. We're libertarians, man. Live and let live. Right? Whatever you do, if you're going to buy or if you're going to sell, don't take advantage. Is that a compelling instruction? That's a directive? Like go buy things and go sell? Is there a mitzvah in the Torah to go buy things and go sell things? Well, mitzvah not to steal, if already you want to start with me, Mr. Elias, but this is not to say that you have an obligation to go buy something. In communist governments, you have an obligation to go buy something, right? Like the US makes you buy health insurance. Why? Because they want you to have it, and they sell it, and they make money. In a normal economy, you're not compelled to buy anything. If you want to buy something, you do. If you don't want to buy something, you don't, right? At least it used to be this way. So this would be tantamount to, my favorite example of this, and you'll ask me at some point why, tantamount to shechita. Is there a mitzvah to go around killing all the animals you can find?
You wish.
I have dreams like this. But at the end of the day, after all is said and done, I can only take apart so many of them before they putrefy. So, is this, like, have I done a mitzvah by going around catching animals and killing them? I mean, we would say if you're going to be purchasing meat, you should buy it from, either you kill your own animals or you buy it from someone who does. The mitzvah is not to eat a trefa, not to eat a nevela. You can't eat non-kosher meat. So by extension, we have a commandment that requires, if you're going to be eating meat, you need to buy meat or consume meat that was properly slaughtered and found not to have defective lungs or anything else grossly wrong with it. And we don't tend to understand such a concept as our goal in life. In fact, the coming of the Messiah all depends on how many animals are left standing. So quit your day job, cancel your Facebook account, and come join me as we go empty the forests of buffalo, caribou, elk, deer, anything that moves. If it bleeds, we can kill it. To quote the great Arnold Schwarzenegger. Why am I all of a sudden compelled to sell or buy things, or at least to do so in a particular way? Again, give you no offense. If you understood the Hebrew, it was simple enough. If you're going to sell and if you're going to buy, just don't take advantage of other people. Oh, so the Midrash comes up with an idea. You know what? If you're going to buy something, you have to buy it from one of your peers. If you're going to sell something, you should only sell it to one of your peers. Why? Because the pasuk says. The pasuk says what? If you sell something to one of your peers, or if you buy something from one of your peers. You see, that's a proof. That's a proof that if you can do it, you must only do it. This is the only way you can do it. And if you do it any other way, you're wrong. I understand why Abigail was upset. She was right. So we're in the in the great wide world of midrashim, where things aren't always what they seem. In other words, the Torah could have been written in a number of different ways, and the words were chosen very carefully. Now, the fact that such a reading is perhaps possible doesn't necessarily mean it's the only reading, but it could mean that the pasuk comes to teach me more than one thing. Maybe there's something else I can learn from it. It's not very compelling in terms of pshat. Like, this is the only way you can read the pasuk, and if you read it otherwise, you were wrong. But it could be the pasuk is going to teach me something else altogether. Now we back out a little bit. What do you mean? If you're buying or selling things, don't take advantage of each other. Well, maybe that mitzvah doesn't always apply to everybody across the board. It does, but for different reasons. You can't take advantage of non-Jews. It's just a chilul Hashem. But what the Torah is warning you here very specifically has to do with your peers. When it comes to buying and selling things, think a little bit more abstractly, right? The economy works such that people, at least they used to be, free to engage in the purchase or sale of goods or services, right? Today, most services are regulated and heavily controlled because the government likes to get a cut too. But back in antiquity, this is how people made a living. You bought things and you sold things, and you bought them cheap and you sold them dear, and this is how you made a little bit of a margin, a little bit of a spread, or you learn to do something really well, and you charge people for your services, and then, economy becomes possible. If I have the option, okay, as we say in economics, ceteris paribus, everything else is the same. If I have the option of selling my cow to Yohan, or selling it to Ivan the Terrible, well, maybe I should, give a little bit of preferential treatment. I should prioritize the transaction with Yohan over Ivan the Terrible. If I'm going to be selling something, and it's going to be involving my parnasah and somebody else's, maybe we can somehow make a living out of this, and I can say, "Oh, it's of benefit to me, and it's of benefit to you. Why not keep the benefit within the family, within the tribe, and try to help and support each other?" Is that not a value that we share? Is it not something that we should take responsibility for?
Well, if it's for the same price, why do we care? If Ivan the Terrible is going to buy you for, $100, and I'm going to buy you for $100, and you have only one buyer,
So
that helps me. Maybe you want to be good.
Again, ceteris paribus. Everything else is the same. Then you would say, of course, why would I refuse a Jewish customer if I only have one item left to sell and I sell it at the same price to you or to him? Why would I care? Now we're cooking with gas. Now the discussion actually begins. Wait a second. What happens if there's a Jewish dry cleaner? And the Jewish dry cleaner has to get all of his work done on, let's say, Motzei Shabbat until Erev Shabbat. There's only 6 days a week that he works. And the non-Jewish dry cleaner, or the non-observant Jewish dry cleaner, don't know any of those, he has 7 days during the week that he can work. And so maybe he has a competitive advantage over the Jewish guy. Maybe the Jewish guy can't keep his business open if he's only offering services during 6 days a week. Maybe the only way for him to stay in business is if the community comes together and says, you know what, we could all try to save a nickel by going to the Korean guy. That's random. I could have said Chinese. We could have all saved a nickel by going to the Korean guy. But instead, we're going to give that nickel, not really tzedakah, we're going to make a concerted effort. We're going to intentionally go out of our way in order to support the Jewish dry cleaner. Why? Because if we don't make this effort, there will be no Jewish dry cleaner. And for that matter, we could say the same for a lot of other goods and services. Someone who observes Shabbat and someone who observes holidays doesn't have as much time to get as much work done. Or I can't be out there promoting my business or my service or my product if I don't have the same. Let's say we're a little bit more heavily regulated, spiritually speaking. And so the non-Jew has a competitive advantage. What can I do? If I sell kosher meat and this guy sells non-kosher meat, so obviously kosher meat is more expensive. It is what it is. It's a slower process. It's more complicated, more involved. If we don't support each other, there may not be a Jewish economy, right? There may not be a, oh, by the way, why do we even have to go so far? You remember we were talking about the Shemitah, probably about this time last year?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember anything about that conversation? Don't feel bad to say no. It's late, we're all
Yes.
tired.
The whole concept of heter mechira,
Heter mechira, which is what?
which is the same thing as mechirat chametz, when we actually sell the land to a non-Jew, and that non-Jew will and the product will belong to the non-Jew, so he can cultivate it.
Which means who can cultivate it?
Whoever, as long as it belongs to a non-Jew.
Well,
No?
why would we then sell land to non-Jews?
Because if it belongs to a Jew, you're not allowed to cultivate the land.
Correct. So we want the Jews to be able to cultivate it,
But we
even
want-
though it's the exact opposite of what the Torah tells you in Parashat Behar. This is literally from that aliyah that we're talking about. We're 5 psukim away from it. The Torah tells you during the 7th year you're not allowed to plant, you're not allowed to harvest, you're not allowed to do anything in industrial or commercial quantities.
on your land.
On your land that's right, which we understand to mean land that's owned by you or by any other Jew. And so what can you do? Well, you can grow your own fruits and vegetables. Whatever you grow has to be open and accessible to everyone around you. This is the Shemitah in Israel. So someone who's poor can come. They can't harvest again in commercial quantities. They can take as much food as they need for the next 24 hours. Right? So every day they have to wake up and go do the same things that I do the rest of the year. They have to go and harvest and learn what it's like to try to make a living in agriculture where there's no rain. So the Torah tells you, here's the deal with the Shemitah. Your job is not to work the land during the Shemitah. You're not allowed to fertilize, you can't plant, you can't do any pruning, nothing that improves the quality of the fruits or the quality of the land. You're only allowed to harvest what grows on its own. You can water the plants, you can chase away insects and parasites, do anything to prevent damage, but that would be it. Fast forward to the year we're in, 1492, after the expulsion from Spain. Rav Yosef Karo moves from Toledo all the way to Greece, eventually into Turkey, and into Tzfat. We're now about 1520 and change. The Bet Yosef arrives in the Shulchan Aruch, aka the Bet Yosef, Rav Yosef Karo, arrives in Tzfat, and he notices that the Jewish farmers in Tzfat are suffering terribly because they can't work during this 7th year. So they have 6 years, they have parnasah, 7th year they don't. And the Torah promises us all kinds of benefits, of course. The 7th year is going to be super productive. You're going to see the 6th year, I'll make it enough. You'll have enough grains and enough seeds to last you not only for the 6th year, also for the 7th. And then you'll be able to to replant after the Shemitah. He notices that as we're trying to reestablish a Jewish presence in the land of Israel, they're unable to establish a Jewish agriculture. The only thing they can do is support the Arabs. Now, there's more than one aspect, more than one angle to agriculture. First of all, it's the ability to own, possess, defend, and control lands, because there's a lot more space used for agriculture than there is for residence. And second of all, it has to do with your support. You can either support the Jews who live like you and tolerate your presence and want you to be there, or you can support the Arabs who, unlike 500 years ago, many of them want to still kill us, chase us out of the land, and refuse us our right to cultivate it or to live there or build on it. So, although technically it looks like the Torah tells us explicitly we don't have the right to sell land to non-Jews in Israel, all of a sudden the Shulchan Aruch says, you know what? The sages, already before his time, had permitted the sale of land in Israel on a temporary, it's a valid sale, but on a temporary 1-year contract. They relieved the nation of this particular interdiction, even though it seems like it's a biblical one, in order to achieve something even more important. And here, there's the beauty of a midrash when it comes to learning halakha and learning it in depth. Because if you read the Torah like a brick wall and say, that's it, here's what the Torah says, this is mutar, that's asur, effectively you end up, some people would say haredi, I don't know, you have these axioms that you walk around beating people to death with. Now, maybe you're right, maybe you're wrong. Sometimes a deeper understanding, sometimes a broader perspective will help you put things in their right order of priority. So yes, the Shemitah in Israel would be great, but at this point it's only Midor Banan because the majority of the Jews don't live there yet. And since it's only Midor Banan, true, we should observe it, but if making this concession on selling the land to the Arabs makes it possible for a Jewish farmer to continue planting his land, and makes it possible for there to be Jews who produce food that they'll actually sell us, as opposed to the Arabs will close their stores and say, we're not selling you, you can die of hunger, then maybe there's more than one thing to be said for understanding things a little bit differently. The Shulchan Aruch made a ruling, and he said, not only do I permit this heter mechira, this permit of sale of land in Israel, which would otherwise be forbidden, but anyone who calls it into question faces excommunication. He was extremely adamant about this, because without this, there is no, imagine that.
I like that. Now I'm thinking about the Chaverim now.
So, no, yes, right. Every year they bring this up and they laugh at it. So he said, not only is it something permissible, it's something that we should insist on, because it's important for us to have a Jewish economy. It's important for Jews to be able to work the land, to live in Israel, to be able to support one another. So, we're on a very similar topic, but it does relate very much to in this particular context of talking about the sale of land, but the Midrash understands it much more generally and in a broader context, which is, you're buying something, why don't you buy it from a Jew? You're selling something, why don't you sell it to a Jew? Go on eBay or Amazon, announce that, I saw, you see this? There's in France, someone posted a job offer, and after the first two items that she put there, you have to have a certain amount of experience and certain thing, be able to work with people, etc.
Oh, non-Jewish.
Yeah, preferably someone not Jewish.
Yeah, and then they justify because of the Shabbat and whatever.
Yeah, of course, naturally. So at any rate, the question begs itself: is this a local technical halacha, where Eli sells spices? He sells herbs and spices, and he would like for me to purchase some, and he expects me to do so only because he's Jewish and because I happen to know that he's also half Panamanian. Is that an excuse for me to give him all of my business exclusively, maybe even spend a little bit more money if I have to in order to support him? Or are there certain limits and boundaries on this concept, as if to say, well, he can charge twice as much if he wants to really ride that Jewish premium for what it's worth? Maybe at some point this obligation is no longer obligatory. Like, it might have been nice if the price was comparable, but it happens not to be.
Yeah, because if the price is not comparable, then it becomes al tonu of the seller, of the buyer. Like, if you force the buyer or you push the buyer,
you pressure the buyer, yeah.
Price,
right. So
then it's going to be
okay. So you want to push the point. You want to push the point. We got an email from West Side Judaica imploring all the Jews on the Upper West Side to go out of their way and buy books over there. Okay, you asked if we should publish this in the newsletter. I would say yes. As a favor to them, they've been helpful to us. We can publish this in the newsletter, and then I'll write a message from the rabbi explaining my personal inclination, which is that, first of all, we have an obligation to make sure that Torah and mitzvot and Jewish literature and religious artifacts and articles are accessible and affordable, and the parnasah of the many comes before the parnasah of the few. Now, I believe I told you once this story, but it's worth repeating. When I was on the Rabbinical Council of Bergen County, which is no great feat, because any rabbi of any Orthodox synagogue is supposed to be on it, because it's supposed to be a collective of all the rabbis in the county, and that's how they make decisions. So the issue came up where the secular, they were owned by Jews, but the Jewish supermarket franchises had all of a sudden started carrying kosher products, right? Which is a catastrophe. If ShopRite and Fairway have like matzah and grape juice, what's the world coming to? I mean, what do we do if we no longer buy at the local kosher supermarket where everything is 10 times more expensive, fruits and vegetables are never fresh, always overpriced? It raises some very troubling questions. So the whole thing started because apparently ShopRite had announced that they're going to open a really big kosher section in Paramus. This is on Route 4. Massive. It's definitely worth going to. And Fairway, in anticipation of this, decided, okay, we're going to start our kosher section, but without all the hoopla, they just opened one. And they had a butcher counter, they had someone, I think it was under the OU at the time. Anyway, so these places are starting a crazy competition. Now, they're much larger than the kosher food showcase or the food emporium or Glad Express or these other small little itty-bitty supermarkets. And clearly they can leverage this, right? Because they have lots and lots of products coming in and out of there on a daily basis, and because these places do a few $1 million a day in business, keeping a few aisles or a few shelves dedicated to kosher products really isn't that hard. It's not like they only have, 2,000 square feet out of which they have to squeeze all their rent and their payroll and everything. So these guys were killing it. Fairway and ShopRite, like Goyim were going and saying, it's kosher products, they're cheap, let's buy them. And these places were absolutely making money hand over fist. And all of a sudden, who complains? One of the local Jewish business owners, right? All of whom live in Monsey, by the way. Nobody lives locally. No, it's funny, you want a supermarket, so nobody would buy from a Jew who studied economics, went to school, he's clean-shaven, he has a kippah surga, he supports the state of Israel. Real kosher can only be from someone who looks angry, has a black hat, wears a long coat, maybe he washes it, maybe he doesn't. Like there has to be, there's a certain thing that you expect. Like if we want kosher, we go to the Haredim. I laugh about this because in France, the Sephardim were rolled over and died when it comes to kashrut. You can pronounce differently, you have your different tunes, you have your Bate Knesset. When it comes to kashrut, you just have to find some Ashkenazi guy to say, it's okay for you to eat it, otherwise it doesn't count.
Well, the top of Ashgacha in French is glatt.
Right, as if Bet Yosef is a lower style.
Well, nobody knows anything. But no,
Bet Yosef in France.
You can find it, but it's very rare. But nobody knows anything.
You have to know somebody.
Yeah.
Anyway, so and this because we contribute to this. We all patronize these ideas. We all support that kind of economy. Where if you want to buy tefillin or mezuzot, it's like you have to go to someone who's like really Jewish. Like I have the black hat that's made somewhere in Europe that clearly Chazal had no concept of and never wore, as opposed to, God forbid, buying it from a Jew who wears a jlaba or a tarbush, who dresses the way Chazal themselves did, some kind of a turban. That would be heresy. So one of these guys, again, the chutzpah, he doesn't even live in the community. He just profits from the community, and he lives in a Haredi community somewhere else. So he comes and he says to this was at the time. This is one of the rabbis in the RCBC. The rabbi have a very wealthy and large community, so that narrows it down to like 20. And he came and we were talking, should we really heed this call? Should we really tell our communities? They wanted us to put into the drasha over the course of the Shabbat. I don't remember if it was specifically Parashat Behar. They said specifically they wanted us to mention from the pulpit, each and every rabbi in the Bergen County area should mention the importance of supporting local Jewish business people. Right? I was young at the time, but nonetheless a libertarian at heart. And I said, gentlemen, I understand. You live in communities where the mean annual income is like $500 million. My community is mostly Israeli and overwhelmingly Sephardi. We have people working in construction and in moving and those little push carts in the malls. I mean, nothing super glorious in my community. And I really do wonder if my concern for the parnasah of a guy who lives in Monsey really should trump the best interests of my entire community of some 2,000 or 3,000 families who can't afford to buy in this store to begin with. In fact, maybe there's something to be said for people who can't afford to buy kosher, if they're not very observant, are going to go buy non-kosher. It's like, does that not sound halachic? I was never very popular on
This is why you like your
always asking the wrong questions, getting the wrong answers. One of the other fights a war that I had to wage with them was a good friend of mine who owns a restaurant. And people got all kinds of upset. They got bent out of shape. Why? Because this particular restaurant, sometimes he's open till 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday night. And that's just wrong. It should be like the Eidah Haredit in Israel, where if you get hashgacha from them, the doors close at 8 o'clock. And there's separate seating for men and women. They don't even want you going on dates. If you're dating, go eat somewhere else. It's not for us. It's like real people are married already. So they were getting upset about this, and I sat there thinking I was in a special needs kind of classroom where I have to explain things from like a very fundamental, basic perspective. So we should make him close his doors at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. I said, really? And the people that go to patronize this place, they come with a Gemara in hand, like they're just up that late because they didn't finish Daf Yomi, but they're going to go and catch the prayer with the sunrise in the following morning. No, they have all kinds of truants, and some of these kids are smoking cigarettes and doing drugs. That's okay, so the kids smoking cigarettes and doing drugs. So we want them to eat in McDonald's because that's the only restaurant open at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday night. Well, poor reflection on the community, it's this, that, the other thing. I said, no, actually, he was the only guy, this is what a little bit of digging managed to reveal. The other restaurants didn't like the fact that people would go to him because he was open that late, because he was drawing this crowd of kids who smoke and drink and look for something to eat later on in the night. And they were saying, oh, it's unfair. We can't be open at that hour. Why can't you open at that hour? Because your products are terrible. No one wants to buy your food. They go to him because it's good, it's affordable, it makes sense. You spend half your money on drugs. You have money for a chicken sandwich. Okay, it works. So, like, I had to be explained to them, these laws of economics, that people will go where it's open. And if they go to your restaurant, not to his, it's because the food is probably better or more affordable or both. And they were all defending, these wealthy Baalei Batim, people, members of their community, their congregation, but they weren't really thinking about the bigger picture. Even rabbis sometimes don't always think about the bigger picture, especially because the people who cut their paychecks sometimes have other interests. But reality being what it was a very interesting discussion. So, clearly, if the Midrash says so, right, every 5-year-old can tell you, of course you have to go to the kosher supermarket. So what if he sells fish for 4 times the price to sell it at Costco? I had to give an entire shiur on this topic. Literally, I had people who came to fight with me about, no, you should be buying your fish from this guy, not that guy. Why? Well, because over there in Costco, for example, they use knives that they use to cut shark fins and scallops. And I said, the Shulchan Aruch and the Rama both agreed to this, unequivocally, that there is no such problem as buying your fish from a non-kosher fishmonger, a non-kosher fish seller. And in fact, if he's cutting up other fish, so probably what he has left on his knife from the previous fish will be wiped off anyway. You're going to wash it by the time you come home. Everybody agrees it's a perfectly permissible practice. What mitzvah do I have to empty my entire parnasah buying a 2-pound piece of salmon when I could actually give some of my to tzedakah, or maybe pay my tuition, or do something irresponsible like help someone else who needs it? Open a gmach for Shabbat, buy more food so I can help give it to people who... Like, why do these things not cross our minds? So, yes, there's a midrash that points out something very interesting. And to put it back into context, you have to appreciate this. David?
But then, just before we go to the midrash, but so why that's not applicable to the Shemirah? Why don't we say you don't need to work the land? If for you it's economically impossible to work the land, just do another work, another job, and then we don't have Jewish farmers.
We don't have Jewish farmers.
Who cares?
And then the Arabs can decide tomorrow they're no longer selling food to Jews, and then you go where exactly?
So it's not only economic; it's strategic here.
But you can apply this to everything. If we decide that we don't have any, Jewish Judaica store anymore, then we give up that business, and then the Goyim take it over, and then they stop selling Judaica.
Well,
we can apply that to everything.
So here I'm going to hit you with a left, where the Gemara makes an interesting comment about halacha and making halachic rulings that are applicable and valid. And it says, if you want to make a halachic ruling that's valid, applicable, and makes sense, like the right thing to do, you need help from God. Because you'll come up with 1,000 sources that conflict each other, and they all tell you this is the most important thing in the entire Torah. You can eat pork and worship Avodah Zarah and drive to the beach with a cigarette in your mouth on Shabbat, but there's nothing more important than buying your car or buying your suits from a Jewish guy. So, there's a context, and there needs to be someone who's not only halachically responsible, but someone who's actually involved in the reality. The Bet Yosef is telling you, living here amongst the Arabs, if they could tomorrow, they would all decide they're not selling food to Jews, period. They would kill anybody who gets caught stealing, and they would watch us all die. We can't do that. That's halachically irresponsible. And so, since the Shemitah is only midrabanan anyway, something has to give. And he thought, as did most of the rest of the rabbis of his generation, they conceded to him at the end because he was the greatest rabbi of his time, that we need to do something. We need to enable this. We need to make this possible. We need to push the point that, this is not only okay, we should patronize it. We should support it. We should actively support it. So he didn't make the point, by the way, that you should pay more to buy from a Jewish farmer. What he said was, let's at least let them compete on even ground and say, okay, work out some kind of heter mechira. At least you can sell and stay more or less in the market. There were very few Jewish consumers at the time, so they were all selling to Arabs. But at least he felt this way. Life in the bigger picture, in the grander scheme of things, becomes possible. Now, the question that you're asking is like the question asked of Moshe Feinstein, which is, should a Kohen become a doctor? Eli, you're a Kohen, right? Don't become a doctor. Make it easy. Huh?
I didn't.
You didn't? A good observant Jewish boy from Miami. So, you think of working in medicine, maybe it's pikuach nefesh, maybe you can save a life, maybe you can do all sorts of wonderful and great things. At the same time, a Kohen is not supposed to be around or in the same building as dead people. And no offense to doctors, but half the time you deal with people who are eventually going to die, and sometimes they do. So should a Kohen be exempted from this because he might at some point be pikuach nefesh? Read Rav Moshe's Teshuvah very carefully. His plain answer is probably it's a good idea that he shouldn't go into medicine. No offense, no insult to anyone. We don't need a Dr. Cohen. We can deal with Dr. Levy, and that's okay. Levy and Down can certainly work in medicine, and the Kohanim should do other things. They can become accountants. They can do computers until learn how to do korbanot. Is it the end of the world that Jews can't work in agriculture? Well, maybe specifically in agriculture it becomes a big issue. Although I would make the case, as we did just a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the Heter Iska. Who needs Jews in banking? Certainly not Avigai Levy. And for that matter, the rest of us here could probably do without them. Why? Because bankers are bankers.
Not sure we could pay the shul though.
Well, if it's my salary, then it's okay. We've been over this. Publicly, I have to make it look good, but under the table, we'll work it out. So who need Jews who work in banking? It happens to be, for generations, Jews who work in banking, and once a halachic mechanism was found that we can somehow permit, the loan as a way of investing with an expectation of interest and a collateral for the principal, then it became okay. And now you have entire communities that subsist on banking, finance, and financial products. So I don't know that it's our responsibility or our job to limit people's options or to limit their possibilities. As a Rabbanim, typically we do our best. We bend over backwards trying to permit even things that are sometimes complicated. Rav Moshe Feinstein, in the end, said, okay, you have a Kohen who's like desperate to go into medicine. It's what he wants to do. It's all his soul desires. I mean, okay, but it's probably not the best way for him to do it. Maybe if you can go into medicine and not deal with the dead bodies, maybe you can go into dentistry and you can be a doctor too. And this way, he doesn't have to go a psychiatrist or a psychologist. He doesn't necessarily have to, live or work right over the morgue. It might not be a bad plan. But to tell people you can't go into this or you can't do that, first of all, they're not going to listen to you. Second of all, even if they do, they're going to be bitter. They're going to resent it. It's not really our ultimate goal. But when it comes to buying or selling, so you're asking me, for example, what about Judaica? If West Side Judaica goes under, right, because their landlord raised the rent, that's never happened in New York City. It's the weirdest thing. It's like he must be anti-Semitic. Mm-hmm. It's a Judaica store on the Upper West Side. I bet your landlord's Jewish. And then for whatever crazy reason, he bought a building and the market prices went up and he's thinking maybe I can make more money if I raise my rent. Right? Which is a risk because he may or he may not. As long as they're there and they're paying it, he's going to make his money. And so now they're making a public appeal, not really on their behalf, on behalf of their landlord because they want to stay there and he wants to make his money. I don't know, maybe he's wrong. Maybe if they leave and he doesn't get the rent that he was looking for, he'll regret it and call them back. The question is, why have they been struggling so much? Is it because they're charging too much? Is it because they're paying too much? Is it because they're just not very good business managers? They don't live on the Upper West Side. They're all from Brooklyn. Is it because you can buy Jewish books online for a lot less money? Not that this is a commercial for Makor Judaica, but look it up. They happen to have really good prices. Next day shipping and half the time it's for free. I'm just saying, I've bought things there in the past. So, am I to oppose the advent of the internet? Am I not into, electronic shopping carts? Like I can even do this from my cell phone. I have a pretty good website.
So
Just today, when I brought up this discussion with Ben, we're in the warehouse. We have tons of beef to move, and sometimes we talk. And he asked me something about. He says, I understand that they're struggling. He's like, but at some point, didn't it occur to them to make a website? And I said, Ben, don't tell me they don't have a website. So he put himself on. He looks at me. He says, no, they don't have a website.
They don't have a website.
Huh? They don't have a website.
Whoops.
And they're getting killed by Makor Judaica in Brooklyn that has a website already for 15 or 20 years. Why? Because they probably went to a rabbi and told them they need this, for whatever. They got a heter. And I guess the coin just hasn't dropped. Like they still don't get this. Like you can move a lot more volume if you reach out to people. You can do shipping. You can work it out. So maybe they're not really that successful at a business because they're just not that good, or someone's out competing them, which is fine. But I have to pay for this. I have to buy more expensively. I have to put myself out in order to sustain them. That's tzedakah. In fact, probably we'd be more effective giving them money and not even buying books if that's the case. And buy, the money that I save by ordering books elsewhere, I can eventually contribute something. I don't know. But there's something to be said for people taking, initiative, and you assume risks when you have a business. And when you have a business for a really long time, sometimes you become maladaptive. You don't pick up on the market trends. And that's something else altogether. If you guys are interested, I had a really interesting thought I was going to share with you. Take a break or something. But if you're tired or you're angry at me, then I'll stop altogether. It's okay.